For 2,000 years, the healing stories of Jesus have stood at the heart of Christian faith, yet their deepest meaning remains fiercely debated, quietly misunderstood, and, for many seekers, heartbreakingly out of reach. This is not a conspiracy. It is something rarer, a careful, honest journey into what Jesus may actually have taught about the human body, the wounded soul, and the mysterious territory where faith meets transformation. We begin not with an answer, but with a question that has never been fully silenced. The words are still there. Every gospel account of healing the blind man who suddenly saw, the leper who was made clean, the woman who had suffered for 12 long years and reached out just to touch the edge of a garment, every one of those stories is still sitting in the text, open to anyone willing to read. Nothing was burned. Nothing was buried beneath a cathedral floor. And yet, across 2,000 years of human history, across centuries of war and plague and grief and desperate prayer, the world has kept on aching. Hospitals fill, people suffer. Believers weep and ask why their faith did not seem to be enough. So what exactly have we been missing? That is the paradox at the center of this video, and it is one worth sitting with, because it is genuinely uncomfortable. If Jesus of Nazareth revealed something profound about the nature of healing, about the relationship between the human body and the human soul, about the way that faith and forgiveness and inner transformation are not separate spiritual concepts, but something unified and whole, then why does the world not seem to know it? Why do so many of the people who love the Gospels most deeply still speak of healing as though it were entirely in God's hands and entirely out of their own? The easy answer, the one the title of this video deliberately gestures toward, is that the church hid it, that somewhere in the long corridors of institutional Christianity, a secret was locked away, a formula was suppressed, and ordinary believers were denied access to something that could have changed everything. That story is compelling. It is also, almost certainly, too simple. What this video will argue is something harder to hold, and ultimately far more interesting. It is not that a cure was hidden. It is that a way of understanding the human being was gradually lost not through conspiracy, but through the slow accumulation of centuries, through changing languages and shifting interpretations, through the very human tendency to want miracles more than we want transformation. Jesus, it seems, kept pointing towards something that his audiences, then and now, found deeply difficult to fully receive. If you are fascinated by the hidden meanings behind Jesus' teachings, by ancient symbols, by the mysterious relationship between spiritual belief and human consciousness, subscribe to this channel now. In this video, we will move through historical traditions, biblical symbolism, and the deeper philosophical currents that run beneath the gospel healing accounts, approaching everything with both an open mind and a critical eye, because the truth, wherever it leads, deserves nothing less. So here is the question that will drive every moment of what follows. What did Jesus actually teach about healing? Not what later centuries made of those teachings. Not what any single denomination has decided they must mean, but what the words themselves, in their original context, with all their ancient weight, actually seem to be saying. And is it possible, genuinely possible, that the most important part of his message was never hidden at all? That it has been sitting in plain sight, inside texts that billions of people have read and recited and held sacred, waiting for a generation willing to slow down long enough to hear not just the miracle, but the deeper word underneath it. 2,000 years of human searching, 2,000 years of sickness and prayer, and the kind of hope that makes a person reach out in a crowd and try to touch the hem of something holy. The answers may not be what you expect, but to understand what Jesus taught, we first have to understand the world he was born into, a world in which every act of healing carried spiritual weight, and every illness raised a question that cut straight to the soul. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine it. Not the painting on a cathedral wall, not the stained glass, the real thing. A dirt road in Galilee, baked hard by the summer sun, the smell of animals and dust and wood smoke. A marketplace where voices overlap in Aramaic, where children run barefoot over stone, where a woman carries a clay jar of water on her head with the quiet expertise of someone who has done it 10,000 times. There are no hospitals here. There are no pharmacies, no diagnostic machines, no refrigerated medicines waiting on a shelf. There is no number you can call when the fever rises in the night, and the child in your arms stops being able to speak. This is the world Jesus of Nazareth was born into. And if we want to understand what he taught about healing, really understand it, past the centuries of interpretation and the weight of theology, we have to sit inside this world long enough for it to become real. In the first century Mediterranean, illness was not merely a biological inconvenience. It was a rupture. A fever could kill a grown man in 3 days. A skin condition that we would treat today with a prescription could transform a person overnight into an exile separated from their family, from their village, from the communal life that gave existence its meaning. Blindness, paralysis, chronic bleeding. These were not just physical conditions. They were social sentences. A person who was sick in the ancient world was often a person who had been quietly removed from the circle of the living. And in the Jewish world in which Jesus taught, the relationship between illness and the sacred was even more intimate than that. Sickness could be a sign of broken covenant, the consequence of turning away from God. It could be a form of divine testing, as in the story of Job, where suffering becomes the arena in which the deepest questions about faith and justice are fought out. It could signal the intrusion of chaotic forces into the order that God had established at creation. The body was not separate from the soul. Physical suffering was entangled with spiritual state, with communal relationship, with one's standing before God. And this meant that healing, in this framework, was never simply a matter of removing a symptom. Healing was restoration of the whole person, back to right relationship with community, with creation, and with the divine presence that held it all together. This is why the healing traditions already alive inside Jewish scripture mattered so much. The Psalms are full of cries to God from people in physical and spiritual distress, and full of the confidence that God hears, that God restores, that the one who descended into suffering does not remain there forever. The prophets carried stories of dramatic healing. Elijah raising the widow's son, Elisha cleansing Naaman of his skin disease. The priestly rituals of the Torah included elaborate processes of examination and purification for those recovering from illness, because returning to health was also a return to community, to worship, to full participation in the life of the people. Jesus did not invent a healing ministry from nothing. He stepped into a tradition already saturated with the expectation that God is a healer, that the God of Israel is, in the words of one ancient name, Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals. But the Jewish world was not alone. The first century Mediterranean was a crowded landscape of competing ideas about where healing came from and what it meant. Greek physicians in the tradition of Hippocrates understood illness through the balance of bodily humors and prescribed diet, rest, and herbal remedy. Roman medicine combined empirical observation with ritual. The great healing sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, drew pilgrims from across the ancient world who came to sleep in sacred spaces and receive healing visions in the night. Healing was everywhere in this world, in temples, in herbs, in prayer, in the hands of traveling physicians, in the rituals of local communities, in the ancient wisdom passed from healer to healer across generations. What made Jesus remarkable was not that he healed in a world that had never seen healing. It was what he said about why it happened and who deserved to receive it. Because in the gospel accounts, something consistently stands out. Jesus did not merely cure, he restored. He touched lepers that no one else would go near. not because touching them would help, but because the touch itself was a statement. You are not outside the circle of human belonging. He spoke to women in public when convention said he should not. He called out to blind men that the crowd was trying to silence. He stopped for the people that the world had learned to walk past. Before we ask what the secret of his healing was, we have to feel why it mattered, why the people who experienced it, or witnessed it, or heard about it around evening fires, wept and argued and could not stop talking about it for the rest of their lives. There is a man sitting by the road outside Jericho. He cannot see the crowd, cannot see the figure approaching from a distance, but he hears it. He hears the swell of voices, the shuffle of feet, the energy of something moving through the world toward him. When someone tells him it is Jesus of Nazareth passing by, he does something that takes everything he has. He shouts over the noise, over the people who immediately tell him to be quiet. He shouts louder, and Jesus stops. That moment, Jesus stopping, is easy to read past, but it is the whole story. Consider what it meant to be that man. Blind, seated at the edge of the road, dependent on whatever coins strangers might drop. He had learned not to expect much, because the world had taught him, methodically, that it had no time for people like him. And now an entire crowd is telling him to lower his voice, to know his place, to stop interrupting something more important than himself. And Jesus stops, not because of the crowd, because of him. The Gospel of Luke tells us Jesus asked a question before doing anything else. "What do you want me to do for you?" It sounds almost strange, is it not obvious? But the question itself is the act of restoration. Jesus was not treating him as a problem to be solved. He was treating him as a person with a voice, with a desire, with a name, now moved to a different road, a different kind of invisibility. A woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, a condition that, under the purity codes of her time, had made her ritually unclean and excluded from community life, had spent everything she had on physicians who could not help her. She does not call out. She moves through the crowd and reaches out to touch the hem of his garment, as quietly as she can. Something changes. Jesus stops, turns, and asks who touched him. His disciples think the question is almost absurd. There are people pressing against him on every side. But he waits. The woman, trembling, comes forward and tells him everything. He does not scold her. He calls her daughter. "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." That phrase appears again and again across the healing accounts, and it deserves to be taken seriously. In first-century Jewish thought, faith was not primarily an intellectual position, it was closer to trust. The active decision to orient oneself towards something, to stake something real on it. This woman had staked what little she had left. She had pushed through a crowd she had no right, by the standards of her time, to enter. That act of reaching broken, desperate, barely hopeful was the faith he named, and what he gave back was not only a healed body. It was her standing in the world, her dignity, her right to be called daughter. Then there are the 10 lepers, calling from a distance because the law required it. They did not ask to be healed directly, they asked for mercy. "Go and show yourselves to the priests," Jesus tells them, and the text says they were cleansed as they went. On their way, in the middle of the journey, one turned back, just one, and Jesus asks, almost quietly, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? There is something in that question, near both disappointment and sorrow. A recognition that healing, even when it happens, does not always complete the circle it was meant to complete. And then there is Lazarus, 4 days in the tomb. Both his sisters meet Jesus with the same words. "If you had been here, he would not have died." The Gospel of John pauses on something that has moved readers for 2,000 years. Jesus wept. Before any miracle, before the stone was rolled away. He stood at the edge of the tomb and wept with the people who were weeping. Whatever else these stories are, they are not cold demonstrations of power. They are portraits of someone genuinely moved by human suffering, not managing it from a distance, but entering into it. A pattern runs through all of this that becomes impossible to ignore once seen. Jesus does not simply announce cures. He stops. He asks questions. He listens. He touches people the conventions of his time said should not be touched. He addresses people the crowd wants silenced. He calls people by name, or gives them back a name, daughter, son, when the world has spent years reducing them to their condition. And in the most dramatic cases, he connects healing, not only to faith, but to forgiveness, most pointedly, with the paralytic whose friends lower him through a roof, because there is no other way through the crowd. The first thing Jesus says is not rise and walk. It is your sins are forgiven. Perhaps the deeper claim was not that paralysis was caused by sin, but something more radical, that this man deserved to be made whole in every direction. That forgiveness and healing were not two separate gifts, but two dimensions of the same restoration. Which brings us to the question, sitting at the center of all these stories, were they always only meant to demonstrate divine power? Or were they also teaching stories, portraits of what it looks like to truly see a person, to stop for them, to treat their dignity as non-negotiable, to believe that wholeness is something they deserve? If these stories carry a deeper teaching, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happened to it? Why is it not better understood today? And is it possible that the answer involves not a conspiracy, but something more complex and more human? The real antagonist in this story is not the church. It is time. It is the sheer, grinding weight of centuries piling layer upon layer between a teacher who walked the roads of Galilee 2,000 years ago and the ears trying to hear him today. Start with the most basic transmission problem. The Gospels were not written the day after Jesus spoke. They were written decades later. Most scholars place the earliest Gospel, Mark, somewhere around 40 years after the crucifixion, with the others following across the decades that came after. By the time those accounts were committed to writing, the communities preserving them had already passed through the shattering experience of crucifixion, the transforming experience of resurrection faith, the turbulence of persecution, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the gradual separation of early Christianity from its Jewish roots. These were not neutral scribes transcribing raw footage. They were communities of faith, writing from within an experience that had already reinterpreted everything they thought they knew about Jesus. Every healing story that reached the page had already been remembered, retold, shaped, and layered with theological meaning before a single word was written down. That is not a scandal. That is simply how ancient literature works. But it does mean that reading the Gospels as though they were unmediated historical transcripts will always lead somewhere incomplete. Then add the language problem. Jesus almost certainly taught in Aramaic. The Gospels were written in Greek. Between those two languages lies not only a translation, but a cultural translation, a shift from a world of Hebrew symbolism, Jewish law, oral tradition, and embodied communal life into the broader Hellenistic world, with its own philosophical assumptions, its own frameworks for understanding the body, the soul, and the divine. Words that carried one weight in their original language sometimes arrived in Greek carrying a different weight entirely. The Greek word for faith, pistis, carried connotations of trust, loyalty, and relational commitment, not simply the internal act of believing hard enough. That distinction matters enormously when you are trying to understand what Jesus meant when he told someone that their faith had made them well. Now add the interpretation problem, and this one runs deeper still. From the very beginning, different Christian communities interpreted healing differently. Some of the earliest communities appear to have practiced healing as a living continuation of Jesus' ministry, understanding themselves as having received something real, a commission, an authority, a way of being in the world that could restore people to wholeness. Others, as the generations passed and miraculous healing did not always arrive when it was prayed for, developed increasingly sophisticated theological frameworks to explain the silence. Suffering began to be reinterpreted not only as something to be healed, but as something potentially meaningful, even sacred. Endurance became a spiritual virtue alongside restoration. Neither movement was dishonest. Both were communities of human beings trying to make sense of real experience in light of real faith. But together, over time, they shifted the center of gravity of what healing meant. And then came institutionalization, the moment that changed everything. Not through malice, but through the ordinary mechanics of scale. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, it stopped being a scattered movement of small communities and became a civilization-shaping institution. Institutions require doctrine. They require hierarchy. They require interpretive frameworks stable enough to hold across enormous distances of geography and culture. In that process, certain dimensions of Jesus's teaching, the more personal ones, the more interior ones, the ones that resisted easy systematization, sometimes faded into the background. Not because they were locked away, but because they were harder to institutionalize than the ones that could be organized into creeds and councils and ecclesiastical structures. The radical, embodied, relational, transformative dimensions of what Jesus did with sick and suffering. People required something institutions have always struggled to preserve: intimacy. So here is the question that reframes everything that came before it. What if the most important teaching Jesus left about healing was never hidden by anyone, but simply became harder to hear as the centuries added their layers, and the distance between his voice and our ears grew wider and wider with each passing generation? So let us try to hear it again as clearly as the historical record allows. Because at the heart of Jesus' healing ministry, there appears to be a teaching that is not about miracles at all. It is about what it means to be a human being. There is a word that appears again and again in the gospel healing accounts, so thoroughly translated, reinterpreted, and absorbed into religious vocabulary, that we almost no longer hear it as Jesus may have meant it. That word is faith. And before we can understand what Jesus was teaching about healing, we have to understand what faith meant in the world he was speaking into. In the 1st century Jewish tradition that shaped everything Jesus said and did, faith was not primarily a cognitive position, not the act of holding a belief strongly enough, or forcing oneself to accept something that reason resists. The Hebrew and Aramaic concepts behind the Greek word used in the Gospels carry a different weight altogether. They speak of faithfulness, of covenant, of a turning of the whole self, not just the mind, but the will, the body, the relationships, the entire orientation of a life toward the source of life itself. When Jesus looked at those who came to him and said, "Your faith has made you well," he was not grading them on the quality of their internal conviction. He was recognizing something they had done with their whole being. They had reached. In the middle of despair, in the face of everything their experience told them about the permanence of their suffering, they had said with their feet, their hands, their tears, their willingness to push through a crowd or cry out from a roadside, "I want to be made well." That refusal to accept isolation as the final word, that courage to turn toward life even when life had given every reason not to, that, in Jesus' framework, is what faith looks like in a human body. Then there is the second pillar, which is harder for modern ears to receive without misunderstanding: forgiveness. There are moments in the Gospels where Jesus links healing and forgiveness in ways that have troubled interpreters for centuries, because the obvious reading seems to suggest that illness is the consequence of sin. But that reading collapses when you look at the full arc of Jesus' teaching. He explicitly pushes back against the assumption that suffering is divine judgment. What the forgiveness in these healing encounters points toward is something more specific and more radical. The release of shame, the restoration of dignity, the reopening of a door that social and religious judgment had closed. In the world Jesus moved through, illness often carried a second wound: exclusion. The leper was not just sick, they were separated, declared impure, forced to announce their own contamination to anyone who came near. The woman with chronic bleeding had spent 12 years in a state of ritual uncleanness. Each person carried not only a physical burden, but the weight of what that burden meant in the eyes of their community. To be healed in Jesus' world was never simply a medical event, it was a social and spiritual reinstatement. What the forgiveness in those encounters was releasing was not primarily a ledger of wrongdoing, but the accumulated burden of being told in 1,000 ways that you were less than whole. The third pillar may be the most quietly revolutionary: compassion. The Greek word used in the Gospels to describe Jesus' emotional response to suffering, splanchnismai, is almost untranslatable in its physical force. It refers to the viscera, the gut. To be moved with compassion in this word's full meaning is not to feel polite sympathy from a safe distance, it is to be physically affected by what you are witnessing. Jesus in the Gospel accounts does not merely observe suffering, he is moved by it. He reaches out and touches the untouchable, stops to ask what a person needs, and weeps. In that quality of attention, full, embodied, undivided, there is already a kind of healing happening before any words are spoken. Because one of the deepest wounds suffering inflicts is invisibility, the feeling that no one truly sees you, that your pain is too frightening for others to remain present with. Jesus, in these stories, refuses that invisibility. And in refusing it, he restores something that medicine alone has never been able to prescribe. The fourth pillar draws all of this into its largest frame. At the center of Jesus' proclamation was the announcement that a different order was breaking into the present, not at some future moment, but now, here, in the encounters unfolding in front of his audience. The healings function in the gospel narratives as demonstrations of that breaking through. When a body is restored, when a shamed person is welcomed back, when an excluded life is returned to full participation in community, something is being shown about what is possible. The transformation is not merely individual, it is social, a sign that the world does not have to be organized around exclusion, and the quiet assumption that some people simply do not belong. The secret, if there is one, may be exactly this. Transformation is available. It begins now, and it begins within, not as a private spiritual achievement, but as a reorientation of the whole person toward a different way of being in relationship with others, with life, and with whatever one understands as the source of life. What Jesus left was not a formula, but a vision of the human person as irreducibly whole, of healing as the restoration of the full self rather than the repair of a single symptom, and of the community gathered around that vision as the place where restoration becomes possible. This vision was never hidden. It was written into every healing story the Gospels preserved. It simply asks more of us than a formula ever could. For more than 2,000 years, the healing vision of Jesus has not remained fixed on the page. It moved through history in the hands of people willing to act on it. In the earliest Christian communities, the letter of James already described an established practice. Gather the elders, anoint with oil, pray over the sick, confess to one another, and trust that restoration is possible. It was not a formula. It was a communal act, a declaration that no one suffers alone, that the person lying ill is held at the center of the community's attention and love. That practice has never disappeared. It lives still in Catholic anointing of the sick, in Pentecostal healing services, in hospital chapels at 3 a.m, in a pastoral care worker sitting quietly beside someone who is afraid. When plague swept through the ancient Roman world, it was the Christians who stayed. While others fled, early Christian communities remained to care for the dying, including strangers, including enemies. Roman observers wrote about it with something close to bewilderment. It came from the conviction rooted in the healing stories of the Gospels, that every suffering person is fully human and fully worthy of being seen. That conviction built the first hospitals. The word itself, from the Latin hosps, meaning guest or stranger, carries within it the ancient idea that the sick person arriving at the door is not a burden, but a sacred encounter. The monastic communities that preserved medical knowledge, the hospices built along pilgrimage routes, the charitable institutions that spread across the Christian world. These are the healing philosophy of Jesus made visible in stone and daily labor. Christianity has never fully agreed on what healing means, and that ongoing disagreement may be the most honest evidence that the question Jesus raised is still genuinely open. Does miraculous healing still occur? Is faithful suffering itself a form of healing? Is medical treatment an expression of divine grace or a rival to faith? These debates have run through every century of Christian history without resolution. The Pentecostal revival of the 20th century brought healing back to the center of Christian practice in ways that unsettled older traditions. Catholic theology developed a rich account of suffering as participation in the mystery of Christ. Protestant pastoral care built frameworks integrating psychological health with spiritual formation. The conversation continues because the question is real and the answer is not simple, and that complexity is not a failure. It is a sign that something important is still being wrestled with. Modern science has begun to speak about the same territory. The field of psychoneuroimmunology studies the intricate connections between mind, nervous system, and immune system. Research on loneliness shows that social isolation damages the body as severely as smoking. Studies on forgiveness suggest that releasing resentment has measurable effects on cardiovascular health and immune function. Research on meaning and purpose reveals that people who experience their lives as significant tend to recover more fully and live longer. None of this proves that faith heals in a miraculous sense, but it does suggest that the ancient intuition embedded in the gospel healing stories, that human beings are irreducibly whole, that healing must address the whole person, that belonging and dignity and hope are not luxuries, but necessities, was pointing at something true about what it means to be human. Jesus may not have had the language of neuroscience, but when he told a paralyzed man his sins were forgiven before instructing him to walk, when he stopped for a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years and called her daughter, when he touched a leper at a time when touching a leper was unthinkable, he was practicing something the research is only now beginning to measure. He was restoring the full person, treating isolation as a wound and connection as a form of medicine. The greatest secret was never a formula. It was a way of seeing, to look at a suffering person as fully human, fully worthy of restoration, fully capable of transformation, and to respond not with distance or doctrine but with compassion that moves in the gut. It was never locked away, never suppressed, never buried. It was written into every encounter, every touch, every moment. When Jesus looked at someone the world had written off and offered them a different word. Perhaps the question people have asked for 2,000 years was always slightly wrong. Perhaps the miracle was not the cure. Perhaps it was the encounter itself, the moment a person invisible to the world became visible. When someone told they were beyond help heard otherwise. When a human being, broken and alone, was met with a love that did not look away. That is still available. It was never hidden. It lives in every act of genuine compassion, and it begins, as Jesus always insisted, from within.